Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
It was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. This is Kendra, and today I have with me Christina as one of our co-hosts. And today we're interviewing Kenny Ballentine. I'm going to let him introduce himself and go ahead and start telling his story in his own words when he's ready.
Okay. Like you said, I'm Kenny Ballentine. My pronouns are they, them. And this is actually take 2 at a Latter-day Survivors podcast. That's something I wanted to bring up because we actually did this once before, and that experience taught me some important lessons about my own healing journey. Recording that first time and hearing it back was something that was really good for me, but it also taught me that I wasn't ready to tell my story yet, as ready as I thought I was, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something I hear you say a lot on the show, that, you know, it's like, it's just 100% up to the survivor of when that's right, and you'll know when you know. And I know now. I'm good.
Yeah.
I feel good talking about it finally. And it took a long time, but I'm happy to be here today to do this.
We're happy to have you, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm sorry in the beginning if I said he. Did I say he when I introduced you?
You might have, you might not have. I'm not entirely too aggressive about it.
Okay. Well, I just want to apologize for not being sensitive about that. So
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, where to begin? So just in terms of who I am now, I've been married for 20 years. I've got 4 kids. I live in Northern California. All 6 of us left the church together in 2020. And really, the experience of leaving the church did something. It did something to my brain. It really gave me permission to recontextualize things I had gone through in my past, things that I had looked at one way. All of a sudden I had this new lens that I could look at it in an entirely different way and realize, oh, this isn't sin and godly sorrow and shame. This was abuse. This was something bad done to me, not something that I deserved. And I literally couldn't think of it that way while I was in the church. It sounds so ridiculously obvious when you hear the story told at face value. These were terrible things done to an innocent young person.
Right.
But I couldn't see it that way until I had cut myself free.
Yeah.
So
that's really common, by the way. It's really common.
I'm finding that out, honestly, from listening to your podcast.
Yeah.
We hear that a lot.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I just had a counseling session this last week, and one of the things that actually has started to open up new memories for me is separating out bad versus good and all the gaslighting that was done in the church. So, like, for an example, my dad drank alcohol. And so he was, as far as the church went, he was a bad person. But how I felt, the times that I would like bring him a beer and sit and watch a sports show with him, felt good. Like I had connection with him. But I had to deny that connection, that feeling. I had to deny my trust in myself and put my dad and his drinking in the category of bad. So I was gaslighted into believing that was bad and my feelings were not valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same thing that happened with my experiences. There's a couple. I would largely say that my childhood was really, really good. other than some obvious examples we'll talk about. Grew up in a safe neighborhood, kind of place where there's lots of trust. You could just hop on a bike and go across town as an 8-year-old and no one would raise an eyebrow about it. Kind of things I would never let my children do today. And I mostly loved it. The experience that would eventually change my life forever happened when I was in 2nd grade, and I was invited to a sleepover with a friend I'd made at school. This friend was part of a very big Catholic family who was sort of really well known in the community as kind of like the community philanthropists. They had a lot of money. All of their kids were adopted, mostly from all over the world. And they had foster kids. They had a lot of foster kids in there. So anytime you went to this house, it was kind of a zoo. New faces every single time. But it also could be really fun. They had an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a basketball court and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I was invited to this sleepover. The red flag that I see now that I didn't see as a kid is that my parents didn't know this family at all. My mom had never met his mom. There was very little introduction, conversation, anything. It was just grab a sleeping bag and I'll get dropped off at the front door and picked up the next day. And again, that was just kind of how things went back then. This night that I spent the night there, it was a warm night. They had kind of like a dorm setup where they had all the boys in one big room with a bunch of bunk beds. There was a girls' room in another place. And in the night, one of the older boys got out of bed and sexually assaulted me as I lay on the floor. The first hardest thing for me to face about what happened that night was that I didn't try to stop it. I froze. I held perfectly still, thinking the best thing I could do is just pretend that I'm asleep. Mm-hmm. Right? I was conscious of everything that was happening, and at one point I became conscious that there was at least one other boy awake who was seeing what was happening. And so, again, I was around age 8. I didn't understand what was being done to me. I had no idea what this was. I just felt that it was definitely embarrassing and humiliating. And so I'd rather be, I'd rather just the story be that it was something that they did while I was sleeping. So I pretended to be asleep. Mm-hmm.
I think you've been told this before, but because we've had this conversation before, but I just want to make sure that you understand that that's normal.
Yes, the fight, flight, or freeze.
Or fawn.
Yes, that too. You know? And actually, that's something I experienced later in life.
And that was for you, that was your way at that time, that nothing made sense to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. That was your way.
I do understand that now. Okay. And that took a lot of work to get to that point with my therapist. And But at a certain point, I don't remember exactly how it ended, but it ended, and it's when I became aware of a lot of pain that I felt after what had happened. And so I snuck over to the bathroom, and I had blood on me, which again I felt like was something really shameful. So I actually remember taking my underwear and wrapping it up in toilet paper and hiding it at the bottom of a trash can, you know, because I didn't want anyone to know what had happened.
Right.
And then probably the thing that I find the most twisted about the whole experience was that the next day, the whole family, including me as their guest, went to the zoo. We just all went to the zoo together to have a good time and acted like nothing weird had happened at all. Years later, as I started getting instruction at church about physical touch, and I'm talking about kind of like toxic instruction, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I started to connect what had happened there with things I was being told in church, and it reinforced to me in my mind that I had participated in something that was really bad. And never once did I hear anything. Well, I never heard a story about a boy or a young man being assaulted or raped. Like, it's not a story that was at least told when I was young. And so the only way I had of conceptualizing it was that I had done something bad. I had sinned. I recall pretty clearly, my dad was a big fan of Spencer W. Kimball. And for people who can't see us right now, there were some big eye rolls on the video.
Yes.
You can hear the eye rolls.
Yeah.
But I remember Miracle Forgiveness. I must have been 10 or 11, and he would read portions from it at church and like youth lessons. And there was a bit that said something to the effect of that it'd be better someone die in an effort to stop being assaulted or raped. It'd be better that you die trying to prevent it than you allow it to happen, which is, if you happen to be a freezer, then that's a pretty damning thing to hear.
Yep.
Yeah. So I carried a lot of guilt for a long time, and when I got into Boy Scouts, I guess we're hopping forward a few years. I was 14 years old. We did a great big trip called the National Boy Scout Jamboree. That's where we traveled to the East Coast, and you would spend a week or two like touring all the historical sites and points of interest, and then you'd go to the biggest scout camp in the world, right? There'd be like 10,000 scouts, and it's a big deal. The President of the United States comes, so I got to see George W. Bush live. Are you jealous?
So jealous.
It's quite a trip, but on that trip, I met another scout. He was an older boy. He was 16. I was 14, and he was a very charismatic kid. The kid who's just like the cool one who everyone wants to be friends with, and he had a very strong interest in me. And so that made me feel very, very cool, because the coolest kid, who was 2 years older than me, apparently thought that I was really cool, and I was ready to, ride the credibility wave to the top of popularity there in the troop. It wasn't very long into the trip before he touched me for the first time. And this was a really confusing one for me. Someone closer to my age, someone I looked up to, and being really confused and unsure if, is this attention that I like? At first, I really didn't know. This is also at like some of the peak time of anti-queer sentiment within the church. So if it is something I like, again, that's really, really bad too. Right? Okay.
Well, it's the sin next to murder, right?
And so again, I don't try hard to stop. And this is where I slip into the fawning, right? Instead of the freezing, right? Yeah. I felt like I needed to keep him happy. And part of that was fear that if I didn't, that our secret would get out and I'd get in trouble, you know? And at one point when I got really worked up about what he was doing to me, there was an evening where his advances led to me gagging and almost vomiting and feeling really sick, and I ran out of the tent and was shaking, and that I think scared him because he thought, oh, Kenny's going to run and tell, right?
Yeah.
And he threatened me. You know, he said, the way he worded it was that we'll be in such huge trouble if they find out what you are doing. Right? Like, you don't want what you've been doing to get us in trouble.
Yeah.
Kind of talking. Luckily, that trip was with scouts from all over a wide region. They weren't from like my home Boy Scout troop. And eventually it would end. And we went our separate ways. I never saw him again. And who knows where he is and who he is, what he's doing now. But that weighed on me guilt-wise more than anything else. And I'm not the type of guilty Mormon who runs to the bishop to confess every week. I'm the one who lies to the bishop every week. That's what I always did. I'd go to the bishop and they'd ask me the questions about the things I've done and the parts I've touched and all those gross questions. And I would just say what I needed to say so that I could get the card and go to the baptisms or whatever it was. But when you walk into the temple knowing that you've lied, you know, to the bishop, man, it's a mind fuck. Like,
yeah.
I remember doing baptisms and thinking that each one I was doing wasn't going to work, right? It wasn't going to count.
I remember feeling that way too. Yeah. I remember feeling that way too.
Me too.
Yep. But
and I know they're not going to redo them.
Right.
They're going to check it off as done. And so there's going to be all these souls up there who are going to be really pissed off.
Right. Oh.
You know?
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. All these thoughts going on in my head as you're talking, and we often talk about this. You really don't have agency. They want to say you have agency and that you can make the right choice. But I mean, we're all three of us are sitting here saying things like, we remember being in the temple, feeling like the ordinances we were doing weren't going to work.
Yeah.
And these were going to have eternal consequences, right? And yet we still did it because the consequence of telling the truth was far worse.
Yeah.
Like the shame, the guilt, the getting disfellowshipped, the wearing of the scarlet letter, and everybody's going to know because you're not taking sacrament. Your parents are going to be disappointed. Your bishop's going to be disappointed.
Yep.
All of that paled, these eternal consequences for these people you were baptizing, that paled in comparison to what the actual consequences would have been for quote unquote telling the truth, right? I mean, that's how bad this is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, growing up, my parents would always say if I ever said like, "Hey, Dad, I want a motorcycle," or something else crazy that kid would say, the answer was always, you could do whatever you want after your mission, right? Mm-hmm. So like I had all these expectations of like life becomes real after I go on a mission. And so whenever there was a sin confession situation looming, I'm like, I don't want to mess up the mission, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, because then that there goes your motorcycle, your tuition, whatever.
Right.
Your whole life goes out the window.
Yeah, not to mention like being socially ostracized. You know, so
yeah. So there's, I think there's two types of people in the church, and sometimes these overlap. But there's people who will lie. So the church teaches people to lie, or it teaches people to be scrupulous to the point of not, feeling like they are so involved in every single little thing. So if you think, oh, well, this bad thing happened, well, it must be because I'm not doing A, B, C, D. It's not because this bad thing happened because bad things happen, or because people are jerks and do stupid things. It's because I did something wrong, or I'm responsible.
I think a lot of people vacillate between those two. Yeah,
definitely.
I absolutely, those two things crossed over for me. I was absolutely scrupulous, and I lied. And I remember being so scrupulous and repenting so hard and just begging the Lord to just forgive me himself so I didn't have to go talk to the bishop about things.
Yeah.
Yes, that's another thing I would do in my head is like, maybe I can figure this out on my own so I don't have to. Yeah. Oof.
The problem is when you talk to your parents first, if you've said anything to your parents, then your parents know. And of course they're going to tell the bishop, or they're going to tell you to go see the bishop. So you have to go and confess to the bishop. That was my situation a few times in my house.
Well, how gross is it that the bishop is the highest authority in terms of like decision making, even to the parents, right? Right. So a kid comes to their parents with something, and the parent goes, well, we got to get the bishop involved, right? This is above my pay grade. Bring in the bishop.
Totally.
I mean, and then people even look at the bishop as above the cops.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Like they believe they can circumvent
stories.
The law.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gross. So anyway, so 2020 was when we pulled the ripcord on the church. It was a long time coming. Just recently, my mom was talking to me about the whole investment scandal that just happened with the church, and she was talking about how that is a bad thing, but it's not enough for her to lose her testimony. And she said, Kenny, it would take a lot for me to lose my testimony. And I looked at her in the eyes and I said, yeah, it did take a lot.
Right.
It took a whole lot. And when she heard me say that, I saw her eyes get big, like a light bulb went off. And she realized, like, oh, this is a lot deeper for you than I thought. Yeah. But when we left, I started doing the obligatory ex-Mormon podcast cycle, right? Listening to everything I could find out there, like obsessively for a while. It was kind of unhealthy, probably.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I just needed to know I wasn't alone.
That's exactly. It's just a validation, right? Yep. Just like, oh my God, I'm not crazy.
Absolutely.
Thank you. But I found Latter-day Survivors. And I remember it was the second episode on your whole program. Hearing a story about a sleepover. And the experience was so similar to my own, down to sensations being described. I literally dropped the drink I was holding, and it shattered on the ground. as a tidal wave, like a tsunami of emotion, just crashed on me, and I went, "Oh, that's what that was."
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I could have told you in like a visual sense of a picture of what happened,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I could told you the words of what happened, and I still wouldn't have called it rape.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But it was after hearing that story that it opened the floodgates for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that honestly, the hardest time of my life came after that recontextualization of really understanding what was happening. That's when PTSD really started to kick my butt, and having flashbacks, having night terrors, waking up screaming and crying.
I'm sorry, Kenny. I'm so sorry.
Well, don't be sorry.
I'm sorry for what happened to you, and I'm
Yes.
sorry for everything coming back in a flood and a tsunami and tearing your life apart. You know, it eventually
it's to happen.
Yeah,
too.
that's
did.
exactly it. Yeah. It happens to all of us. Just you know.
Yeah. Well, it's like your
different.
leg broke a long time ago, and you never got it set properly.
Yeah.
If you want to start walking straight, they got to re-break that leg.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a phenomenal analogy, actually.
It really is.
You like that,
Yeah.
nurses?
Yeah,
like
I do.
that?
Yes. We approve.
Okay.
Yes.
And
thank you for trusting us with your story after we put you through all that.
Well, actually, it was almost my first impulse was like, oh my gosh, I need to get on this show, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I still withheld for like a year before we did that first one.
Yeah.
But I've known talking with you guys was going to be important for me. I've known that since day one.
Yeah.
But another reason why it's important that scab got ripped off, right, is that I eventually came to realize that I had been having PTSD symptoms all my life. I just didn't know what they were called or what to tie them to. And I had different labels for them, like stupid and lazy and learning disabled and sinner, right?
Yep.
And as I start to do the work, I realize, oh, that's connected to this. And this is connected to that. So
it's all connected.
It was worth the painful avalanche. I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. Coming out on the other side is worth it, but in the process, it feels like you're drowning.
Yeah.
Like my analogy was that I was underwater, the waves were out of control, and I was being tossed in circles and couldn't find my way up to the surface. And whenever I could find my way up to the surface, I would just gasp for air because I knew I was just going to be tossed again and tossed and tossed. And the only people that could help me in my thought process was the church, because I was still a member. And what they were doing was not helping me. They wouldn't throw me a lifeline. They wouldn't throw me a rope. They wouldn't throw me a life preserver. Nothing. What they would do is they would take my head, they would grab my hair, and they would dunk me underwater and hold me underwater. That's what happened with the church. That's what happened with some of my family members. And that's what happened with my workplace, too, when I started needing help for my PTSD and my anxiety. No help. There's no trauma-informed care, no trauma-informed people in this country that are willing to help you. You have to be your own hero, you know?
Yeah. There are heroes out there that help, but you gotta find them. Yeah.
But it's hard to find the words to be able to find,
or even
like,
know to
say
ask.
Exactly. To know what to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you feel like you're drowning, you have no voice.
It's so hard to bring up with people, even to this day. Like I had the longest drawn out effort in telling my mom about what had happened. And I still am very light on details with her. I just wanted her to have enough context to understand why I'm going through what I'm going through. Because the thing, you know what really sucks about leaving the church is that self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to leave the church and be miserable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they use that as proof that you just lost something really good and you no longer have the light of Christ and all that, right?
Yeah, and you just don't even want to give them the satisfaction of being able to think that.
No, no, yeah. So, like, I want to put on a mask and show, look, I'm the happiest person ever.
Yep.
But I have been miserable.
Yep.
Because you're, like, isolated from who used to be your friends and family. You don't know how to talk and connect to people meaningfully anymore. You don't have organic friendships the way you use. It's like a reset button on your whole life.
Yep.
Plus, I'm dealing with all the PTSD stuff and don't feel comfortable talking to anyone about it, right?
Right.
So I needed her to know that I'm not miserable because of sin.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time. I scheduled a picnic with her where we were going to go and have this conversation maybe 6 times. Scheduled and canceled over and over again. And then eventually I just got so tired of doing that I just wrote a big long text. And I said, this is the best I can do. And, it wasn't super detailed. And it included instructions that said, please don't ask me about this. Don't surprise me by bringing this up. When I want to tell you more, I'll tell you. Also, here's a list of things that trigger me.
Yeah. Good.
And she's been quite good, about it. She really has put some effort into that.
That's hard.
Yeah.
I can tell you that when I talk to my mom, I've talked to her about a lot of things over the past few years, but I told her when I was 15 what happened to me. And she has blamed herself from that day and looked at what she did wrong. And when I bring it up, it's also a trigger for her, where her first words are, I did the best that I could. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have helped you. If I had known, I would have saved you.
It's 100% not what you want to hear from her.
It's not what I need to hear.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to traumatize my mom with my trauma. I don't want to give her reason to feel like she failed me. But I need her to understand that her decisions to take care of herself by marrying this person made my life change.
Sure. Right.
From that time forward.
And the other difficult part about that situation is it becomes really easy for your mom or my mom to become the person in the narrative that we feel sorry for.
Exactly. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's the thing that I still haven't got to with my mom in detail about the sleepover.
Yeah.
Because she blindly trusted. And that has ramifications on me to this day. My children do not do sleepovers. I just don't do it. Anyone who knows me would probably describe me as someone who's over the top in how I shelter my kids. Yeah. And I just say, whatever, sorry, that's what the world turned me into.
I parented the same exact way.
Sure.
Me too.
My kids are adults now, but sleepovers were an absolute never for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's same here.
I actually had this conversation with my mom today because we were talking about epigenetics. I don't talk to my mom that often, but today she happened to come over and pick up a couple things. And so this is fresh in my mind. But we were talking about epigenetics and how, like cellular memory. So if I used an example for her that if my great-great-grandfather was to have fallen out of a tree and almost died, and then going forward from there, he has trauma associated with trees, that he doesn't want anybody to climb a tree because he's afraid that they might get hurt. And he'll never climb a tree again. the next person down the line may know the story of Grandpa falling out of the tree and almost dying. So they'll have the memory and the feelings associated with what their grandfather told them, but carrying forward that person who, so the grandfather telling the next person, that person telling the next person. So all the way down the line, coming down to the great-great-grandson, he knows that he has a fear of climbing trees and that trees are not safe, but he doesn't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that anxiety feeling, the cortisol, the high levels of cortisol, you can learn by nurture why trees are unsafe, but you can learn by nature with the whole epigenetics and
Sure.
the changing of our DNA through the anxiety and trauma that carries forward to each generation. You just don't know the story. You don't know the why. You just deal with that anxiety. So I told my mom, I'm like, look at my kids. I told them no sleepovers. Sleepovers were a really hard thing. Like, it wasn't something that I was willing to let them do. And I actually was a parent who gave in once I felt like I knew that my kids were going to be safe at this other person's house, who was going to be there, what rooms are the kids sleeping in, that kind of thing. And I knew them very, very well. Yeah. I knew the family. There's really only one or two families that my kids ever slept over with, but yeah.
Well, the trust thing becomes more complicated when you bring in the idea of intuition and the spirit, right?
Yes.
The Holy Ghost. There's a story that my mom tells pretty often that is toxic as fuck. There was a time in my hometown I grew up in where there was a legit serial killer on the loose who was preying after children and hadn't been caught yet. And then a kid, one day, my sisters were walking home from school, and my mom claims that she got a voice, a prompting that said, go find your girls and pick them up and bring them home, right? And so she does that. She picks them up, brings them home, and then apparently that day, another kid was abducted off the streets that day. And so she took that as proof. Heavenly Father was looking out. Because she's the mom, she got the word, and she went and saved her girls. Mm-hmm. Now, we'll ignore the obvious question of what about the other kid?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, right. Are we going to ignore the obvious question?
I guess that's not. But when I hear this story, it's, well, why didn't God tell my mom when I was being harmed?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Or
did he, and she didn't listen? Like,
well,
how do you know what actually happened?
That's why I don't want to bring it up with my mom.
Right.
It's like,
because is she going to own it? Like, is she going to own it if, like, she's not going to remember that very night, probably, right?
I don't know. There was actually a revelation not too long ago that kind of shook me up. And that was that after the text message where I told her that I had been assaulted as a child, didn't say by who or when, she talked to my brother about it, and my brother knows quite a lot. He actually knows all the details and is a good supporter of mine. He also knows that my mom doesn't know and was going to be respectful of that. Right. And so my mom was kind of prodding for more details, and Jake is saying, I can't tell you, it's going to be between you and Kenny to figure that out together. And then she said, I wonder if it had to do with the blank family. That's the family that I had to sleep over at. Yeah. She said, I always had weird feelings about that family. So she thought of the family herself almost 30 years later, it was the first possibility that came to her head, right?
Yeah. Did you go over to their house often? Was this like a one-time thing?
No,
or?
there actually were, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 sleepovers. That happened on the first one. Mm-hmm. And again, it goes to show what a weird mind game, what this does to you, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it almost felt like I could kind of normalize or almost erase what had happened by going back and acting like everything was cool.
Right.
There was even another incident that occurred on another visit with they had an in-house tutor, a live-in tutor for the kids there at this mansion, and he actually exposed himself to me at another visit. So I mean, I'm assuming all kinds of bad stuff happening at this home. And the parents, they're not even there. You know, they're both like super successful attorneys, right? And the houses and the kids in the house are being run by maids and tutors, and it, like, even the little amount of trust that my mom had in the parents of this household, even that was misfounded because the parents weren't even there, right?
Yeah.
So I have trust issues now.
Of course you do.
Big way. Yeah.
Of course you do. I have trust issues too. You're not alone, Kenny, in that at all. Yeah. That's one of the hardest things to learn how to get back, because I think part of that learning how to get that trust, being able to trust people back, is learning how to trust yourself and trust your own intuition and trust that it's okay to feel, you know, in general, to feel, and to separate out gaslighting and invalidation that we've had in our past from what we actually feel. You know, how it actually is inside me. Because we've been told, we've been lied to.
Well, I think that the thing that does that is that in the church and in a lot of faith traditions, I guess, they take that idea of intuition and make it outside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And they make it contingent upon your worthiness.
Yep.
Right.
You can't possibly be feeling that because you're past feeling.
Right.
Have you heard that? Past feeling?
Yes. Yeah. Or you don't trust your intuition because you don't think you're worthy of it.
Yeah.
Right?
That was me like, all the time.
I'm feeling this, but what do I know? Obviously I'm not going to be getting the direct line from God. Yeah.
So when you start taking the sacrament again, that's when you can start feeling again.
If you're doing it honestly.
Yeah, if you're
not lying to the bishop.
Yeah, it's telling you the sacrament makes you worse sometimes.
It's true.
Yeah. There's so much actually, there to unpack.
And being a priest and blessing the sacrament, that was maybe the biggest level, right? That was the biggest guilt moment for me always, was I would like do this and then I'd look out at all these people and I'm just like, what have I done?
Right. Right. You've turned everybody in the congregation into sinners. Now you have to hope that
unholy communion.
Right. Now you have to hope that you can undo people's belief in the church in retrospect because of what you did as a priest, right?
Well, I just assumed that they would be all okay, but I would answer for every one of them. Kind of thing.
That's a very scrupulous thing. Yeah. Yes, I would feel that too.
Yeah. Kind of taking on yourself the responsibility of everybody else's eternal salvation in the congregation.
Yeah. Oh, like Jesus.
Yeah.
Kenny, I'll tell you, I also cut ties with the church in 2020.
It was a big year for that.
It was a big year for that. And like you, it was it was a long time coming, but that's when I like had my big aha moment.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, the trust issues, what you talk about, that's probably was and still is my number one hang up. Obviously I've come a long way, and through therapy and other modalities, I have to practice listening to my intuition all the time. It has to be an everyday, all the time thing. But there was actually a time shortly after I left the church, I didn't really want to be alive, because I believed that part of my brain was so damaged that if everything in my entire decade's worth of life had been a lie, and I hadn't been able to trust any of that, how could I learn how to trust anything going forward? If I had fallen for this or been a victim to this, how was I going to be able to know? How was I going to be able to ascertain things? And it, like I said, to this day, I think it's going to be a lifelong endeavor of just practicing all the time, learning how to trust my own intuition. But I just want to validate that I get you when you say there are trust issues. I get it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people in general will ever understand how violent religious trauma is.
It's I love that you use the word violent.
Yeah.
It is absolutely violent. Thank you for using that correct verbiage right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just told my story, right, as a rape and sexual assault victim with extreme PTSD. I go to therapy 2 times a week. I spend most of my time talking about the Mormon Church. All right? That's like, that should put it into perspective for people, right? I had some terrible things happen to me, and I go there and talk about bishop interviews and things like that, and tithing. And
Well, because as a child who is indoctrinated into an organization that tells you that you don't get to say no. You don't get to say no to a calling. You don't get to say no to baptism. You don't get to say no to becoming an Aaronic priesthood holder, Melchizedek priesthood holder. You don't get to say no. You don't get to say no to your parents. You are strictly obedient to your parents.
But you have free agency.
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of...
So they say.
Right. So it's a lot of contradiction there. So when you're put in a situation where you have nobody else to turn to, and the only person that you can determine whether this is right or wrong is yourself, but you're not allowed to say no?
Yeah. Well, you're told you have free agency, but the right decision is already determined.
That's right.
But we don't believe in predestination in the church.
But they even say things to you like, because I've asked the question, well, what if I pray and I get a different answer? Well, if you're getting an answer that goes against anything the prophets, seers, and revelators have said, then you've received the wrong answer and you need to go back and pray.
No, if
pray harder.
Yeah, if you deconstruct it far enough, you come to realize that in the church, you are allowed to receive one revelation in your life. You're allowed to pray to find out the church is true, but after that, you have to stop thinking entirely.
That's
it. You don't get any more. That's it.
Yeah, so if you stop thinking entirely, then how can you follow the Holy Ghost and determine whether or not the Holy Ghost is telling you what they're telling you, and if what they're telling you is the right thing to do? How do you know the difference between the Holy Ghost and your own intuition? And really the reality is if the Holy Ghost tells you to do something that's in line with the gospel, then it's the Holy Ghost. But if the Holy Ghost is telling you to do something that's not in line with the gospel, it's Satan. So if my intuition is telling me to do something that is not in line with the gospel, then I must be Satan.
Right. And that's why it's so hard to within the church to do anything against the grain. Like for years I stayed because I wanted to be the person who helps make the church better. Oh, right.
Same.
We've all had that, right? You're like, well, if we all leave, then the church will just get worse and worse, right?
Right.
If we all leave, though, then we have a lot of other people that are leaving behind us.
Yeah.
If we leave and we speak up and use our voice in a way that makes it so that other people like us can hear it and know that they're not alone, it's going to continue helping other people to get...
And that is happening. That is happening.
Absolutely.
But when you're within, trying to make change happen is almost like, it's almost the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
You know, just on a real small level, my wife and I, when our oldest turned, I think 8, I think that's when you have your first interview, right? Mm-hmm. With the bishop. So she turned 8, and that was about to happen, and we both felt really uncomfortable with the idea of her being alone behind closed doors with the bishop. And we liked the bishop and trusted the bishop, but still, like, my parents were teachers. They would never be allowed to do that. It's against the law, right? And
they still do that, by the way, not just with bishops, but I watched my neighbor across the street. One of their kids got into a car with their visiting or their home teaching companion, who was an old man, and they were allowed to be alone. There's nobody else in that car with them. Yeah. And it made me ill. It made me
they have had a policy change now because of Sam Young, who was excommunicated for actually trying to make a difference.
Right.
Where they will allow a parent or someone else in the room if you request it. Not required, which it should be required. But back then, when we made the request, it was unheard of. It was crazy. And people treated us like we were crazy. They were like, why? What are you saying? What are you saying the bishop's going to do?
Exactly. You know? It's almost like you're by requesting this, it's a statement that you're saying that he's a bad person.
Well, yeah, and it's a lack of faith.
It's a lack of faith, exactly, on your part, right? But I've actually had people I've talked to say, point blank, they requested this for their kids and were flat denied and told that's not how the church operates. It's not how it works. You don't get to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So we were eventually like, well, do you want her to get baptized or not? We're not going to put her in there. And the compromise, we had to make a compromise. Like, how weird is that?
Oh my gosh.
Was that the primary president sat in with, so it was the bishop and the primary president and my daughter.
Well, and I can only imagine that the thinking behind that is, well, they're not going to confess anything juicy if their parents are in there. But if their parents aren't in
exactly
there,
it.
Yeah, if their parents aren't in there, then I can coerce some things out of them.
Yeah.
And if a child say a child commits a crime, right? The police cannot interview that child without a parent present.
Yeah.
So why is it okay for a person who has no real authority to sit in a room with a child and interview them without a parent or guardian present?
And ask gross questions. I mean...
Ask questions these kids probably don't even know anything about.
So by the time second daughter turned 8, they had made that policy change, and so I was allowed to be in the room. And this bishop was a gentle soul and probably had no malice in him at all. Just, some of them are real good people. This was one of those. And when he got in his list of questions to the one where he had to ask my little innocent 8-year-old daughter, do you live the law of chastity? And she looks back at him and says, what is that? He just was like, oh God, like what? I don't want to do this. Like, I could tell that he knew this wasn't right, and he really kind of sidestepped around it, and which I was glad he handled it that way. But I think the fact that I was in there made him feel the absurdity of it. It was like, oh, I can't answer that question in front of your dad. It's just
why would
wrong.
you be able to ask that question without a parent present?
I don't know, but I wonder. I wonder how the dynamic would have been different.
They're not as intimidated by the child and asking those questions as they are intimidated by the parent. And then seeing that parent and realizing, would I want my child to be sitting in here with an adult man asking these questions?
Yeah.
Would that be safe?
Mention, they're not trained in any of this. They're not trained therapists. They don't have medical training. They don't have psychiatric training.
So some of them are chiropractors.
Oh, sure. That's true. All right. I'll give you that. But I'm like, come on. You're going to be asking kids these sensitive questions. You've had no training, no real legitimate training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not even cracking the egg on when you get teens and adults involved.
Right. And then they become marriage and relationship therapists and they call themselves counselors, not therapists, because they can't use that word. I just want to commend you, despite the fact that this policy hadn't been changed. I just want to say kudos to you for sticking up for your kids and for not taking no for an answer.
Yep.
Yeah, well, my wife was really the fierce warrior on that front. And
Mama Bear.
Just super proud of her for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the weirdest thing was how the rest of the ward reacted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was just the strangest thing. And I remember telling the bishop, I said, this should be a no-brainer. This is to protect you, man.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
what happens if she comes out saying, what if she comes out making up a story about something you did?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to believe her.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know. Right? It's like, I don't know. It's just dumb. It's just really dumb.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about a group who would kind of fall apart if they couldn't maintain control over people.
Absolutely.
So.
Yep. Absolutely. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So life goes on. I'm getting better. I kind of wanted to do this podcast to be a bit of a validation to my progress that I've made. I can just feel, I feel so much lighter than the last time we had this conversation.
You sound lighter.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've made a lot of progress. And the reason I wanted that validation is because it's really hard to know that you're making progress. Because some days it's still really, really hard. And I still get really sad. And I still have flashbacks.
Same.
And then something will come along and remind me, you used to have flashbacks every night.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
You know, you're getting better. So.
Well, also,
yeah.
I've noticed this time that you have not gotten tearful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that I was really torn up that last time.
Yeah, Christina and I were just actually having this conversation about some of the things that, you know, I don't want to tell your story, Christina, but about some of the things that you would talk about. And anytime you would talk about it, you could not say it out loud without it causing an eruption of emotions. Mm-hmm. And I feel the same way. You know, like I have had a lot of things in my life that I could not say without having, you know, tears and panic attacks and sobbing. And the more that we've learned to talk about it, the more that we do talk about it, whether it's with therapy or with a friend, and we should just call that friendapy, you know?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, right?
It's
Friendapy.
free therapy, too.
Yes, it is.
The
And
free
especially, it's good therapy, it's good free therapy when you have a good friend to do that with. But,
Yeah.
you know, when you talk about it, it has less power over you. You know, it's not a secret anymore. It's not something that is a part of you that's bad.
Yeah,
you know?
And I've wanted to master this. And I don't know if that's even a real thing or if that ever will happen. But I just love the idea that at some point I can talk about this and feel like I am in control. Mm-hmm. Not that it has control over me.
Well, I think you've made massive progress on that front. Yeah. I mean,
I owe a lot of that to EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's been very good for me, and I understand it's not great for everybody. And you have to have a really good practitioner, I think. But through that process, like, I mean, you really drill down, you know, and you're going over this stuff over and over, and sometimes it's like you're re-breaking that leg every week,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
until you get it just right. And then once it's right, you're like, oh, well, it's not bothering me as much as it used to. So that's helped a lot.
Yeah.
And now you two are both making me feel good.
Aww.
Thank you.
Hey,
I think you're amazing.
Everybody. Yeah, I think you're amazing too. I think too, you know, some of what helps so much when you're going through therapy too is understanding at a really core level that you don't have any ownership over what happened to you, because that's that space that we lived in for years and years and years. Our whole lives was just that we had some part in it or some role to play in it. And once you finally understand at a deep soul level, none of this was my fault. Guy didn't have any ownership in it. Then you can really start to acknowledge what happened without that shame and guilt associated with it.
Yeah, for me, the two aspects of starting to heal was, one, that exactly, getting over the shame and the ownership. And two, was giving myself permission to not have to be strong.
Yes.
Yep.
So, I mean, as a dad, especially when I was a Mormon dad, there's a very sort of, there's a high expectation, you know, of who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to look like, what kind of car you should be driving, and how much money you should be making, and holding together the family and being a emotional rock for everyone else. And it took some time, but eventually I was like, I'm going to be okay with me wanting to stay in bed all day.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm going to be okay with it.
And I just want
to
say,
it's not my ideal. I don't want to stay in bed all day, but I had to go through that.
But I'm going to honor
and
that.
allow it.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that as a father, or me as a mother, or Christina as a mother, I think that it is way more important and more of an example to our kids, a real life example to our kids, that we go through something like this. They watch it and they see you come out the other side and see you better than you were before, see you more empathetic than you were before, see you owning your own emotions, owning and allowing your emotions to be felt, rather than pushing them down, pushing them away, and expecting your children to do the same.
Yeah. Setting a realistic expectation of emotional health and mental health.
Yeah, because life is hard. There are just short periods of time in life that are easy. Yeah. You know, that everything seems to be falling into place and that there's no stress.
Well, and even then, I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right? So it's hard to enjoy those times, right? It's hard to enjoy the times that are good because you're still thinking about those things that happened before and the possible things that come after. But really, one of the best things that we can teach our kids is sitting with our emotions.
Yep.
Even when it's hard. Being present with our emotions. Because one of the problems I've learned about with PTSD is that I wasn't ever present. I was living in the past. I was reliving the past over and over again, and I was scared of the future. I was worried about the future. I was worried about what was going to happen next. I couldn't be.
Yep.
Period. I couldn't be. I had to be hypervigilant.
Yeah.
I think there are some gifts to the healing journey that come.
Absolutely.
My two older kids, my two big girls, were right in that age group that got just demolished by the pandemic in terms of their social emotional life.
Yeah.
They were high school and junior high, you know.
Yeah.
My other two kids were younger, and it didn't really seem to affect them at all the same way, you know. Kind of just made a weirder normal for them. But those two older girls even though we're all pretending life has gone back to normal and we're not wearing masks and all that kind of stuff, they've never bounced back. And I see it in their whole generation, all their friends, that mental health is in the trash.
I have to agree. My oldest was a senior, and they went on spring break and never went back. So they never had any closure. They never had a graduation. They didn't have any of it. And just like you said, the ramifications I'm still seeing.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. So, well, the reason I bring it up is that if I wasn't going through this very difficult healing journey myself, I wouldn't have a lot of the tools that I do have now for helping them. Mm-hmm. You know, like I'm doing grounding exercises with my oldest daughter all the time and helping her identify when she's dissociated and stuff like that. And so that's a gift. I'm happy to have that.
Yeah. I say all the time, Kendra and I have talked about this many times just this week even, this idea that I really do think the greatest gift we can give the people we love is to do our own healing work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
And it doesn't just heal you, it heals the generations after you, and it heals the generations before you, the people that didn't have a voice, the people that couldn't speak up, the people that weren't allowed to feel, the people that weren't allowed to have emotions.
I believe that. I definitely believe that.
There's a global awakening, you know.
Yeah.
I believe that wholeheartedly. There's a global awakening.
There's a global awakening and a global going to sleep happening on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's
and
definitely
people
this,
seem to be in one or the other camp.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the people that are going to sleep, do you mean by that they're dissociating and that they're pretending like the things that are happening aren't happening and they just live in their own little world?
Probably.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Joining Team Hate.
Right.
Those folk.
Well, and if they can put themselves in that position, then they have to dissociate from their own intuition. And what has caused that? Religion. Right? Yeah. Religion that threatens them with their life. Yeah.
Isn't that something that here's the three of us and we've all left the one and only true church on the face of the earth, right? which should be the greatest cause of good in the world. Mm-hmm. And just in the time since we've left, take a step back and look at how much good you've done since then compared to all the time before. Mm-hmm. Now I'm only looking at your podcast alone, right? Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot more, but what you've done with your podcast, I just finished a film on getting everyone in America health care, and I'm just like, I'm on team doing good now.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Back then I was just busy.
Right.
But I wasn't doing any good.
Well, and everything that you did, all your time, talents, and everything with which you had been blessed had to go to the building up of Zion. Had to go to, and was attributed to the church.
Or to the Gateway Mall.
Right.
Isn't it City Creek? I thought it was City
Creek.
That's City Creek.
Yeah. City Creek Mall.
You know what you say? You're on team help people now. That's that's actually really profound because I really felt like my whole existence in the church was doing everything for tomorrow. So just sacrifice today so you'll have blessings tomorrow.
Yeah.
Lose yourself today. They said those words. Lose yourself.
In the service of
others. Lose yourself. Yeah. I mean, those are really powerful words if you break them down. Lose yourself today so you can have blessings tomorrow. Sacrifice today for tomorrow. Endure to the end so you can have joy later on. Yeah. It was never about the here and now, and there's so much beauty to be found in helping people now.
So funny because that's what's like, that's what comes natural to people.
Yes,
right?
I believe
Living in the moment comes natural. Because I remember being a child and hearing the verse in the Book of Mormon where it says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Right.
Now, and they were using that in a negative connotation. Yes. They were saying this is what the sinners are going to say.
Right.
But I remember as a kid hearing that part, being like, exactly. Yes, that's what we should be doing. Right. Well, let's be merry now.
Yes. If you think about Lehi's dream, let's reinterpret it. Okay. So Lehi's dream, there's a bunch of people walking toward the tree, right?
Yeah, which is actually Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream originally.
Right.
But go ahead.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm like, wait, what? No, I don't know these things because I don't care anymore.
It's all plagiarism, but go ahead.
Right. It's all plagiarism. So, Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, Lehi's dream. All the people that are walking towards the tree of life. If the tree of life is kind of like the tree of knowledge of good and evil, kind of like in the Garden of Eden. You know, it is these people that are walking, trying to live in the moment, and they're helping each other along the way, along the iron rod. And I think that the people in the church have misinterpreted the idea that they are those people.
Yeah.
They are actually the people in the great and spacious building, mocking and throwing stones and making people believe that that's not the right way. Don't live in the moment. Don't be who you are. Don't help other people.
Right.
You need to help build up this really huge building we have over here that looks like the Salt Lake Conference Center.
It really does. It does.
So what's next for you, Kenny?
What's next for me? So I have a movie I just finished that is about to premiere and will be on Amazon and all over the world, hopefully, called Healing Us.
Amazing.
Thank you.
And it needs a disclaimer, kind of like the disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast, to say you will be traumatized by it.
It has a lot of sad stories in it, but it's also very powerful.
It is very powerful.
Narrated by Susan Sarandon.
And Kenny, tell us what role you have in this film.
I directed and shot most of it, and then I have a wonderful editor named Maddie Purvis, who is another ex-Mormon filmmaker.
Yes. Yay, Maddie!
What was the name of the film she did about BYU?
She did Same Sex Attracted.
That's right, and that was a phenomenal film.
Yeah, I'll tell her you said that. She'll love to hear that.
And tell Maddie hi from me too.
I will absolutely do that.
Yes.
Can I make an announcement that you can delete if you don't like the announcement?
Sure.
Yes.
Oh, well, I fully plan a collaboration with Latter-day Survivors in my near future.
Yes.
I've wanted to do something film-wise related to the church and assault survivors and the journey.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's my language, you know. Yeah. If I have something that's on my head this much, I have to make a movie about it. And so Kendra and I have talked about it quite a bit, and I've got a bunch of ideas, and I say expect something very cool to come from us at some point.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
All right, you two, I have to bounce, but thank you so much for doing what you do. I love Latter-day Survivors so much, and I think you are the you're the real angels.
Oh, thank you, Kenny. We love you too.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Take care. Okay. Good luck with everything.
All right.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life can remind us that we are not alone in this.
I was born in rose-colored water. It seeped into my eyes and soul. And I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful. But no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life. It's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst enemy? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life. It's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know,